I started my first shift at 9 on a Thursday night, sitting in a truck that wasn't warm yet. The thermos my landlord's wife had filled that afternoon was down to lukewarm, and the coffee tasted like it had been sitting in a metal drawer. The cab smelled like gun oil and wet dog, though there was no dog. The heater ticked as it worked itself up, a slow metal sound that filled the gaps where a radio should have been playing. Rain had settled on the windshield in fat, unmoving drops, the kind that doesn't run down so much as weight. I logged the fuel gauge in the little spiral notebook they'd given me, 3/4, and clicked my flashlight on and off twice to check the batteries. Both worked. I checked the spare in the door pocket. That worked too. Everything on the little checklist worked, and I remember feeling proud of that in a small, tired way, like a kid who'd packed his own bag for the first time. I adjusted the mirror. I adjusted it back. The radio on the dash hissed low, a constant, patient static that I would come to know better than my own heartbeat. Dispatch hadn't called. Nobody had called. Out past the windshield, the parking lot ended in a wall of black pine, and beyond that, there was nothing I could see, only the sense of a great deal of land holding still in the dark. I waited. The district ranger was still inside, finishing whatever a district ranger finishes, and I sat, with my hands on the wheel, and told myself this was the easiest money I'd ever make. Sit, drive, look, log. Nothing about it felt wrong yet. That's the part I keep going back to. Nothing felt wrong yet, and I had no way to know how much that word yet was carrying. The posting had said 2 things that mattered to me: free housing and overtime. Everything else was just words. I read it on my phone in a parking lot outside a place that had turned me down for a job stocking shelves, and I applied before I finished my sandwich. I was 23. I had a semester of tuition debt from a degree I never finished, and a stack of my mother's medical bills sitting on a kitchen table 200 miles away, in a house I couldn't keep. She'd been gone 14 months by then. The bills hadn't gone anywhere. They just kept arriving. Thin envelopes with windows in them, addressed to a woman who couldn't read them. I'd moved 4 times since the funeral, chasing cheaper rent, and I still couldn't make it. A bunk in a ranger station, a modest stipend, and all the graveyard hours nobody else wanted added up to more than I had anywhere on earth. The station came with a room, a shared bathroom, and a hot plate. I didn't need more than that. What I needed was to stop the bleeding, to send a little home against the debt each month, and sleep somewhere I wasn't paying for. So when the man on the phone asked if I minded nights, if I minded being alone, if I minded a place 40 minutes from the nearest gas station, I said no to all 3. I'd have said no to worse. That's the thing people don't understand about being broke enough. It closes doors behind you. Every door except the one you're standing in. I couldn't afford to quit before I even started, and I couldn't afford to be picky about why a job this remote had gone unfilled long enough to still be posted. I didn't ask that question. I should have. But a man with a table full of bills doesn't ask why the lifeboat has empty seats. He just climbs in. The station door opened, throwing a bar of yellow light across the wet gravel, and a man crossed the lot without hurrying. He opened the passenger door, got in, and pulled it shut. And then he didn't say anything for a full minute. I know because I watched the dashboard clock. He was older than the truck, and the truck was older than me. Gray stubble, deep lines, hands that had done outdoor work for 40 years and looked like it. He smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. Del Prater, the paperwork had said. District Ranger. Instead of introducing himself, he reached over and tilted my side mirror a 1/4 inch, checked it, and let go. He picked up the radio mic, keyed nothing, set it back in its clip so the cord hung straight. He touched the map pocket on the door, felt that something was in it, and nodded once, a small private nod, like I'd passed a test I didn't know I was taking. Then he looked at me for the first time. You, Bergen. It wasn't quite a question. I said yes. I started to tell him I was glad to be here, that I appreciated the chance, the kind of thing you say. He let me get about 4 words in before he spoke over me, not unkindly, just unlistening. Can you follow instructions? Again, not really a question. I said I could. I said I was good at it. He studied me a moment longer, the way you'd look at a tool you weren't sure would hold, and something in his face decided I'd have to do. We'll see, he said. He didn't ask where I was from. He didn't ask about school or family or why a kid my age wanted nights in the middle of nowhere. He didn't seem to care about any of it. He cared about one thing, and he'd already asked it. He leaned forward, popped the glove box, and took out a laminated card. It had been white once. Now the edges were soft and rounded from handling, the plastic gone cloudy at the corners where 1,000 thumbs had pressed. He held it a second before he passed it to me, like he was deciding something, then set it in my hand. Read the card. That was all. While I turned it toward the dome light, he unfolded a topographic map across his knees, the paper worn to cloth along the creases. There were pencil marks on it that weren't part of the printing. Small, careful notations in a hand that wasn't his, some of them traced over so many times they'd torn little holes. He didn't explain the map. He didn't explain the card. He just watched my face while I read the first line. And I felt him watching, the way you feel a teacher standing behind you during a test. I got 2 lines down and started to form a question, opened my mouth, and he said, without looking up from the map, "Not tonight?" 2 words, flat. I closed my mouth. When I finished reading, I moved to hand the card back, and he shook his head once and tipped his chin at the sun visor above me. I slid it up behind the elastic band there, where it sat like it had sat for years for men before me. Later I'd learn there was a worn spot in that elastic exactly the size of the card. The first 2 lines were nothing. That's what I told myself, sitting there with the card angled into the weak light. The first said to log the fuel gauge at the start of every shift, which I'd already done and felt briefly smug about. The second said no personal vehicles past the second cattle guard on the entrance road. Both of them read exactly like the kind of thing a board supervisor types up once and laminates and forgets, the sort of laminated notice you find zip-tied to a chain-link fence at every work site in the country. Log your fuel. Park where you're told. I almost relaxed. I remember, actually, letting a breath out through my nose, The small relief of realizing the mysterious card was just a housekeeping list. That Dell's gravity had been about nothing more than a man who took his paperwork seriously. 2 lines in. That was the whole story I'd built. A tidy checklist from a tidy old ranger. Then my eyes went down to the 3rd line, and the story I'd built came apart without a sound. The font was the same. The spacing was the same. Somebody had typed all 7 lines on the same day, on the same machine, and there was no visible seam, no change in the paper or the print, nothing to warn you. But the 3rd line was not housekeeping. The 3rd line was something else wearing housekeeping's clothes. And once I read it, I couldn't unknow that the first 2 had been camouflage. Line 3 read, "If a trail sign points toward a trail that is closed on your map, do not correct it. Log it and drive on." I read it twice. It didn't say why. It didn't say what would happen. It just gave the instruction in the same flat, tired voice as the fuel log, as if a sign pointing at a closed trail were a thing that happened often enough to need a standing rule. Line 4. The radio may call from the Hollow Fork channel after dark. That channel has been dead for years. Do not answer it, and do not key back. I felt the back of my neck do something small and cold. A dead channel that calls, written down, laminated. Line 5. If a gate on Service Road 4 is standing open, but its lock is still latched shut, close the gate by hand. Do not touch the lock. I read that one slowly, trying to picture it, the way you try to picture a shape that can't exist. A gate open, with the lock still closed. That isn't a rule about a gate. A gate can't do that. A lock latched shut holds the gate shut. That's the entire purpose of the object. There was no version of the physical world where line 5 made sense. And yet there it was, printed as calmly as park, where you're told. None of them explained themselves. That was the thing that got into me. Not one of them said, because, or else, or if you don't. They were written the way you write instructions for something everyone already understands, which meant somebody, somewhere, understood these. I glanced sideways at Dell. He was still looking at his map, but I had the feeling he was reading me instead of it, waiting to see which line stopped my breathing. I went back and read 3 through 5 a 3rd time, hoping they'd resolve into something ordinary. They didn't. And there were still 2 lines left, and something in me already didn't want to read them. Line 6. If someone at a campsite calls you by name, keep your light down and keep walking. Rangers on this shift do not give their names. I sat with that one. It was worse than the others because it was about me. The first 5 were about the park, about signs and channels and gates, things out there. This one reached in and touched the person reading it. Someone at a campsite, in the dark, saying your name, a name you never gave. And the instruction was not to be afraid, not to run, not to call for help. The instruction was to keep your light down and keep walking. The way you'd walk past a stranger doing something you'd decided not to see. And then the small, awful clause at the end dropped in like a footnote. Rangers on this shift do not give their names. As if giving your name were the danger. As if a name were a thing that could be used against you out here. Line 7. If a paint blaze is wet, you did not pass it earlier. Remark it before the tower light goes off, starting from the far marker in. I read that one 3 separate times, and I still couldn't hold all of it at once. A wet blaze means you didn't pass it. That sentence assumed you'd think you had. It assumed you'd walk a trail, see a fresh-looking mark, and be certain you'd made it yourself. And it was telling you, no, if it's wet, that wasn't you. Remark it, before the tower light goes off, whatever that meant, whatever tower, whatever light, whatever deadline lived inside that phrase, starting from the far marker in. An order of operations for a job I couldn't picture, attached to a deadline I didn't understand, defending against a mistake I didn't know how to make. I looked at Dell. He hadn't moved. He said nothing at all, and his nothing was louder than the rain. I couldn't help it. "What happens," I said, "if I don't follow one of these?" I tried to make it sound casual, like a new guy asking about the dress code. Dell folded the map along its worn creases, slow and exact, corner to corner, before he answered. He looked out the windshield at the black tree line where the headlights didn't reach. And he was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer at all. "The rules aren't up for questioning," he finally said. "They're up for following." His voice was even, almost gentle, the voice of a man telling you the low temperature for tomorrow. "Last 3 men who sat where you're sitting wanted to know why," he went on. "Wanted the reasons. I gave the reasons to the first one." He paused. "I don't anymore. I waited for the rest, for the part where he'd say, and they got written up, and they got transferred, some ordinary ending. It didn't come." He let the sentence sit there unfinished, and the unfinished part filled the cab. Last 3 men weren't around to ask anymore. He'd said it exactly the way he'd tilted my mirror, as a small correction to something that needed correcting. My mouth had gone dry. I wanted to ask more, and I understood in the same moment that asking more was itself the thing he'd just warned me against. He reached over and tapped the ignition with one finger. "Start the loop," he said. So I did. I turned the key, the old engine caught, and I pulled us out of the lot onto the gravel, into the dark I'd been paid to drive through. We rolled the closed campground loop first, and for a while the world was ordinary in a way that let me breathe again. The loop was a 1-lane gravel road that circled maybe 30 sites, all of them shut for the season, and my job was to check each one. Dell talked me through it the first time, and then just watched. At each site, I'd slow, put the light on the fire ring, and check for warmth, not with my eyes, but with the back of my hand held above the stones, because closed campgrounds don't have fires, and a warm ring means somebody's been where they shouldn't. Every ring was cold, cold as the rain, cold as the picnic tables beaded with it. I counted the bear bins at each site, the heavy steel boxes, and thumbed the latches to make sure they were down. All latched. I swung my flashlight across the empty sites, the faded numbered posts, 14, 15, 16, the flattened grass where tents went in summer. And there was nothing in any of them but wet leaves and the smell of pine and old ash. Dell rode beside me with a clipboard on his knee, logging the time at each site in small block capitals. He didn't say much. Once, when I let my flashlight beam swing wide and lazy across the trees, he reached over and pushed my wrist down so the beam pointed at the ground. "Keep it down unless you need it up," he said. That was the only correction. Otherwise, the loop was exactly as boring as I'd been promised. 30 cold fire rings and 30 latched bins and 1 leaning post I noted to report. And I started to believe the card was just a strange old man's superstition. But Dell never stopped watching the sights, even the empty ones, especially the empty ones. Halfway around, the radio came alive on the normal channel, and I flinched before I could stop myself. It was only dispatch. A woman's voice, flat and bored, the sound of someone at a desk somewhere warm. "Base to Patrol 2. Position check." Dell nodded at the mic, so I picked it up. And my thumb found the key, like it belonged there. "Patrol 2, campground loop, all cold, all latched." A pause, then, "Copy, 2, Reyes out." That was it. Reyes, a name, a desk, a bored human being on the other end of a working radio. It steadied me more than anything had all night. This was a real job, with real dispatch and real check-ins. And whatever the card was, the world around it still ran on ordinary rails. We rolled off the loop and up to the first gate on Service Road 4. A steel bar swung across the road with a chain and a padlock. I got out into the drizzle and checked it the way Dell told me. Tug the gate, thumb the lock. Both solid. Gate closed, lock latched, chain tight. Exactly as a gate should be. I logged it, checked 2 more bare bins by a trailhead, noted a leaning trail sign to report, and hauled a full trash bag out of an overflowing bin at the old picnic area, its lid propped open by summer garbage nobody had collected. Small tasks, real ones. As I climbed back in, Dell was looking up at the ridge through the windshield. High up in the black, a single point of light burned steady, small as a star, but too low and too orange to be one. "Tower light," he said. "Fire lookout up top. You keep track of that light. Every shift. You always know where it is." He didn't say why. By then, I'd learned not to ask why. The far trailhead sat at the end of a spur road, a gravel turnaround, with a wooden kiosk and a metal register box bolted to a post. Dell told me to check the register, so I lifted the hinged lid. And the flashlight found a spiral logbook chained to the inside by a length of dirty cord. I flipped it open to the last written page. The entries were exactly what you'd expect. A family of day hikers, out by 4. A scout troop, 12 names, out by 5:30. A den leader's careful printing. A couple from Ohio, no timeout listed, though a lot of people forget to sign back in. The pen dangling on its string had gone dry. The last page after them was blank, cream-colored and empty under my light. Dell had rolled his window down and was watching me from the truck. "Read the last 3 names before you close it," he said. "Every time. Last 3. I didn't ask why. I read them under my breath. The couple from Ohio, and the last scout, the way you'd read them to remember. Then I closed the lid and clicked it down. It was only then I noticed the quiet. Not silence exactly. The rain was still coming down soft, ticking on the metal lid of the register box. But underneath the rain, there should have been the low, steady hum of insects, the sound the woods makes, even in the wet. And there wasn't. Nothing chirped, nothing sawed. The bugs had all stopped at once, everywhere around the turnaround, as if the whole clearing were holding its breath and waiting to see what I'd do next. The insect silence stayed with me as we pulled off the spur and back onto the main forest road, and I kept catching myself listening for a sound that wasn't coming. Then the headlights swept across a trail junction, and I forgot about the bugs. There was a wooden trail sign at the fork, the standard kind, a routed board on a post with an arrow and a name, and the arrow was pointing left, into the trees, at a name I recognized from the card. Hollow Fork. I slowed without deciding to. My map, the copy folded in the door pocket, showed Hollow Fork as a closed trail. A dashed line crossed out in the legend, decommissioned years back, grown over, no longer maintained. But this sign wasn't old. The arrow was crisp, the routed letters clean, the paint inside them bright white, like it had been touched up that afternoon. And it pointed with real confidence at a solid black wall of pine where no trail existed at all. Not an overgrown trail. No trail. Just trees, close and wet, the same as the trees on either side of it. No gap, no tread, no worn line through the brush where feet had gone. I stopped the truck. Everything in my training, the 2 days of it I'd had, pulled at me to get out and fix it. A leaning sign you straighten. A wrong sign you correct, so the next hiker doesn't walk into trouble. My hand was already going to the door handle, my body ahead of my thoughts, because that's what a ranger does. He fixes the sign. Dell's hand closed on my forearm. Not hard. Just enough. Rule 3, Dell said. That was all at first. His hand stayed on my arm until he felt me stop leaning towards the door, and then he let go. His voice hadn't changed at all. It was the same voice he'd used for the fuel gauge and the tower light, flat and unhurried. And somehow, that flatness was the most frightening thing that had happened all night, because it told me he wasn't surprised. He'd expected this. There was a rule for this, because this happened. Log it, he said. Time and location. Then we drive. My hands weren't quite steady, but I got the notebook off the seat and wrote it down. The time, the junction. Sign at Hollow Fork Junction, pointing into trees. No trail present. The whole time I wrote, my headlights held on that bright, white arrow, and the arrow held on the black wall of woods, patient, certain, aimed at nothing. When I started to lift my flashlight toward the trees behind the sign, to see what was back there, Dell said, "Keep your light down. Don't put it past the beam." So I kept it down. I put the truck in gear and rolled us forward, slow. And as we came around the bend, I looked in the side mirror at the sign one last time. The mirror was black. The sign wasn't in it. Maybe the angle. Maybe the dark. But we'd only gone 20 feet, and the sign should have been right there, catching the last edge of the taillights. And it wasn't. It was already gone from the mirror. Or just gone. I drove for a while without talking. I couldn't get the arrow out of my head, the confidence of it, pointing so cleanly at nothing. My hands had settled into a tight grip on the wheel and stayed there, 10 and 2, knuckles pale, and my mouth had gone dry the way it does before you're sick. I didn't say any of that. I just drove the forest road at 15 miles an hour with the wipers going and my jaw set, and I let Del watch me do it. He watched me for a good mile. I could feel it. Then he shifted in his seat and said, "Turn us around at the next pullout. Head back to the station." I asked if something was wrong, if we needed to report the sign. "It's reported," he said, nodding at my notebook. "That's what the log's for." He was quiet another moment, and then he said the longest thing he'd said all night. "You're going to follow these rules for the rest of the season. A man follows rules better when he's seen a little of why. Not all of it. A little." He looked out at the trees going by. Enough to keep you from getting curious in the wrong direction. Curious in the wrong direction is how the last 3 ended up in that binder. He let that land. Time you saw the back room. I found the pullout, swung the truck around in the gravel, and pointed us back the way we'd come, toward the one lit window of the station. And I didn't ask what binder. I already knew. I was about to find out. Del unlocked the station and led me past the front office, past the bunk room, and the little kitchen with the hot plate that would be mine, to a door at the back with a keyed deadbolt. Inside, the room was long and low and cold, and it smelled like dust and old rope and the particular mildew of gear that's been damp and dried 100 times. Search and rescue storage. Coils of climbing line hung on the walls. There were litters and backboards stacked on end. A shelf of headlamps with corroded batteries, folded space blankets, a wall of topo maps so old the folds had gone furry. And along one whole side, metal shelving crowded with 3 ring binders, each spine labeled by year in faded marker, going back decades. Further back than I'd have guessed the station had even existed. Del went straight to a lower shelf without looking, the way you reach for something in your own kitchen in the dark, and pulled out a thick binder with a spine cracked white down its length. He carried it to a metal desk under a gooseneck lamp, clicked the lamp on, and set the binder down. He didn't hand it to me. He stood over it and opened it himself to a place near the middle, a place it seemed to want to fall open to, and turned it a quarter so I could see. "Read it," he said. "Don't touch it." I put my hands in my jacket pockets without being told to, the way you do around something you've been warned about, and I leaned in over the desk to read. The pages were incident logs, decades of them, and they'd been sorted, pulled from their years, and gathered here together, because they all had one thing in common. Every single one involved the Hollow Fork Trail. Names, dates, brief descriptions in cramped ranger handwriting, and beside each one, in a column of its own, a status written in a shorthand that repeated down the page. Returned to station. Did not exit. Voice only. Boundary failed. Recovered wrong. Not recovered. Some entries had a status that was just a blank line, a name, and a date, and then nothing. A space where a word should be that no one had been able to write. I read down the column, and my skin tightened. Returned to station, I understood. Not recovered, I understood, and hated. But recovered wrong sat there without explanation, and voice only, and boundary failed. And each one opened a door in my mind I didn't want opened. Del reached past me, careful not to let me touch the page, and put one blunt finger next to 3 separate entries, 3 different years, decades apart. I read the dates. They were all the same week of the same month, the week we were in now. Not a coincidence, he said. Same week, every few years. Somebody moves something they shouldn't, and it wakes up, and it runs the same way it always runs. He tapped a 4th entry lower down, a name, a date in that same week, and a blank where the status should be. That one, he said, we never got to write. I looked at all those blank statuses and understood that a blank was the worst status of all. What is it? I said. My voice came out lower than I meant. What's out there? Dell closed the binder, slow, one hand flat on the cover, and looked at me for a while before he answered. And I understood he was deciding how much to say, rationing it, the way he'd said he would. I'm not going to tell you what it is, he said. I don't know what it is. Nobody who found out came back able to explain it. He said it plainly, not as a scare, as a fact he'd made his peace with. Here's what I know, and it's all you need. There's a line out past Hollow Fork, an old boundary. It's held by markers, blazes on the trees, cairns, the signs, all of it kept exactly the way it's meant to be kept. As long as the line holds, whatever's on the far side stays on the far side. It doesn't come across. It can't. He tapped the cover of the binder. Move a marker, answer it, invite it in any way at all, and the line opens. Then it doesn't need to come across because it can reach across, using what's already here. The radio, the register, the signs, the gate. Anything that carries a message, it'll use to carry itself. And it calls people out. It doesn't drag them. It calls, and they walk out to it. And that's when they end up in that book. I asked how you close it. You put the line back the way it was, he said. Every marker in order, before the tower light goes off at dawn. Light stays on all night. When the sun clears the ridge, it goes dark. Whatever's open when that happens, stays open. He slid the binder back onto its shelf, exactly into its gap, spine out, and clicked off the desk lamp so the room went to the single bulb by the door. First sign the line's open, he said, walking me back out, is almost always the same. The Hollow Fork channel wakes up. It's been dead for years, dead as a stone. No traffic, no static even. Just nothing. And then, one night, it isn't nothing anymore. We came out to the truck, and he reached in through the driver's door and turned a dial on the radio, setting it to scan. So the display began cycling through channel numbers, pausing on each, moving on. You leave it scanning tonight, he said. You need to hear it if it starts. And when it starts, you remember Rule 2, no matter what. You don't answer. You don't key back. He looked at me then, and for the first time, there was something under the flatness, something he was choosing to warn me about because it had once gotten him. The voice isn't the hard part, he said. The voice is easy to ignore when it's a stranger. The hard part is who it sounds like. It always sounds like somebody you'd give anything to hear again. I opened my mouth to ask how it could sound like anyone, how a dead channel could know a single thing about me, and the scanner stopped. It had been cycling steadily, number to number, and it stopped, mid-scan, on a channel with no number the display could show, just a row of dashes, and out of the speaker came a soft breath of squelch, the sound a channel makes right before somebody talks. For a second, there was only the open channel hiss, that hollow, breathing sound of a frequency with something on it. Dell went still in the doorway of the truck. I sat with my hands in my lap and watched the dashes on the display like they might change. Then the squelch broke, and a voice came through, and the whole world narrowed down to the speaker on the dash. It was a woman. She said my name. Just my name. Once. Soft, the way you say a name into a dark room to see if anyone's there. Half a question. Gentle at the end. Cole. And I knew it. I knew it before I could think, the way you know a smell from childhood before you can name it. Because it was my mother's voice. Not like my mother's voice. Hers. The exact pitch, the exact way she pressed the L at the end of my name, a way I hadn't heard in 14 months, and hadn't known I was starving for until it came out of that speaker. My hand was already moving. I watched it go, my own right hand lifting off my lap and crossing to the radio mic in its clip, reaching for it. And I hadn't decided to do that. I hadn't decided anything. My body was answering her the way it had answered her my whole life. Dell didn't grab me. He didn't touch my hand. He reached over and laid 2 fingers flat on the dashboard beside the radio and said one thing. Rule 2. 2 words. Quiet. It was enough. My hand stopped an inch from the mic, and I made it come back, finger by finger, and put it in my lap and held it there with the other one. She kept talking. That was the part I wasn't ready for. It wasn't a recording, wasn't a loop of my name. It was her, and she was saying things. She said she'd been waiting. She said she didn't understand why I hadn't come, why I'd left her alone so long. And then she started saying things she knew. She talked about the parking garage at the hospital, the 3rd level, where I used to sit in the car before I could make myself go up. And nobody knew about that. Nobody. I'd never told a living person that I sat in that garage some days for an hour. She talked about the bills on the kitchen table, said I should stop worrying about them, said none of it mattered now, come and see. She said the last thing, the thing I hadn't said to her, the thing I was in that garage trying to work up the nerve to say when they called to tell me it was already too late. And she said it back to me, gently, like she was giving me a gift, like she was telling me it was all right. I could say it now. My eyes stung and blurred. My hands were shaking in my lap, both of them, and I kept them pressed together, kept them down. Every part of me wanted to key the mic and say the thing, just say it, just once, to her voice, whatever it cost. Dell's voice came low beside me. Don't key back. Not to say yes, not to say no, not even to tell her to stop. He watched the mic, not me. Silence is the whole rule. The second you press that button, it knows you're there. Right now, it's guessing. Don't answer the guess. My hand drifted again. I don't know how long I'd been sitting there. Minutes. The voice under my skin now. Patient. Loving. Terrible. And I felt my right hand start to lift a second time. Slower. Sneakier. Like it had learned to move without waking me. Dell saw it before I did. Say the card, he said, out loud. All of it. now, and keep saying it. I didn't understand, but I did it, because doing what he said was the only solid thing left in the truck. I pulled the card down from the visor with a hand that had been reaching, which gave that hand something to hold, and I read the 7 lines out loud in a flat, cracking voice. Log the fuel gauge at the start of every shift. No personal vehicles past the second cattle guard. If a trail sign points toward a trail that is closed on your map, do not correct it. Log it and drive on. My mother's voice went on underneath mine, saying, "Come and see," saying, "It's not far." And I read louder, over her. Do not answer the Hollow Fork channel. Close the gate by hand. Do not touch the lock. Keep your light down and keep walking. If a paint blaze is wet, you did not pass it earlier. When I reached the end, I started again from the top. The rules gave my mouth something to do that wasn't answering her. Gave my hands the card to grip. Gave my mind a track to run on instead of the track she was laying down. Second pass. Third. By the 4th time through, my own flat voice reciting fuel logs and gate procedures, her voice had thinned, and then the squelch closed, and the speaker went back to a dead, even hiss, and the dashes on the display blinked out to a blank. I sat there with the card in my fist, and my heart going hard. The channel was dead again, truly dead, and I waited for Dell to look relieved. He didn't. He looked grimmer than before, which I hadn't thought possible, staring at the blank display like it had told him something. "It doesn't wake up on its own," he said. "That channel's been dead 6 years. It doesn't just decide to talk. It talks when the line's already open." He turned in his seat and looked at me directly, and his voice was careful, the way you're careful lifting something you think might be heavier than it looks. "So it's open. Something moved. And you've been here," he thought, "3 days. You did your orientations walk." It wasn't a question. "What did you touch this week, out on the trails?" Think. I told him I hadn't touched anything, that I'd done the daytime walk on Tuesday, like I was told, just to learn the layout, that I hadn't done anything but walk. He kept looking at me, unblinking, patient, the way he looked at the empty campsites. "You touched something," he said. "You didn't mean to. Doesn't matter that you didn't mean to. Something you did on that walk is why that sign turned around tonight. So think hard. Walk me through Tuesday. Every stop. Everything you laid a hand on." And I sat there in the dark truck with the dead radio between us, and I started, reluctantly, to remember Tuesday. Tuesday had been my 2nd day, and it had been sunny, which felt impossible now. Another seasonal, a guy named Pruitt, who was rotating out, had handed me a radio and a map, and told me to walk the lower trail system alone to learn it. Said it was the fastest way to get the layout in your legs. So I'd gone. 4, 5 miles, easy grade, a beautiful, cool morning with the birds going and the light coming down green through the canopy. I'd taken it seriously. I'd wanted to do a good job, to show up on my first real shift already useful. So I hadn't just walked. I'd worked as I went, the way I'd seen groundskeeping done, the way I thought a good ranger would. I checked the paint blazes on the trees and noted the faded ones. I found a trail sign with a loose bracket, and I tightened the screw with the multi-tool on my belt. I dragged a fallen branch off the tread, and near one of the junctions, where the trail met an older, rougher path, there'd been a pile of flat stones knocked over and scattered across the ground, messy, like an animal or a careless hiker had kicked them apart. So I'd stacked them back up, neatly, squared the flat ones, made a tidy little cairn beside the trail, the kind of thing that marks a route, and I'd stood back and felt good about it. I'd actually felt proud. I mentioned it to Dell almost as an afterthought. The branch and the bracket and the little rock pile I'd rebuilt, and when I got to the rock pile, he went very still. "Where?" he said. "Exactly where was the rock pile?" I described it as best I could. "Near the top of the lower loop," I said, "where the maintained trail meets that older, rougher path that heads off downhill toward." I checked my mental map. Toward the hollow fork side. 3 big flat stones mostly, and some smaller ones, all knocked apart across the tread. I'd stacked the 3 flat ones and capped it with the smaller ones and squared the whole thing up so it looked intentional. Dell closed his eyes. Just for a second, but I saw it, and something went out of his shoulders. "Describe how you found it," he said, "before you touched it." "Exactly." I told him. Knocked over, scattered, like it had collapsed, like nobody had cared for it in years. 3 flat stones, lying flat on the ground, and the rest kicked around them. "It wasn't collapsed," he said. He opened his eyes. "It was built to look collapsed. That's a boundary marker, one of the ones that holds the line. It's supposed to look like a knocked-over pile of nothing, so that no well-meaning kid comes along and fixes it." He said it without any anger, which was worse than anger. The whole point of it lying flat is that it reads as broken. Broken, it holds. Standing up, neat and squared off, the way you left it, it's a doorway. You didn't knock a marker down, Cole. You stood one up. You put it back together, into the shape it's not supposed to have. My stomach turned over. I'd been proud of it. I'd built it carefully with my own 2 hands and felt good. And it had opened the thing in the binder, and every voice on that radio led back to a pile of rocks I'd tidied on a sunny Tuesday morning. I felt sick, actually sick. "Then we have to fix it," I said. "You have to, or call somebody. Call the tower, call another station, somebody who knows how." Dell was already shaking his head before I finished. "Doesn't work like that." He said it gently, but it was final. The line answers to the hands that moved it. Whoever opens it is the only one who can close it. It's not a rule somebody made up. It's just how the thing is. I can't do it for you. I could walk out there right now and lay every blaze perfect, and it wouldn't take, because it wasn't my hands on that marker. It was yours. I felt the cab go small around me. "The whole boundary has to go back," he said. "Every marker remarked in order, starting from the far one and working in toward the station side. Before the tower light goes off, sun clears the ridge, light goes dark, and whatever's open at that second stays open for good. That's the deadline. That's the only deadline that matters." I asked what happened if I didn't make it, if the light went off before I finished. He looked at me and didn't answer right away. And then he said, You saw the blank statuses. That was the answer. My mouth had gone completely dry. I asked if he'd at least come with me. "I'll be on the radio," he said. "I'll walk you through every marker. I'll be your voice the whole way, but I can't cross the line with you. The second I step over, I'm just another thing out there for it to use against you. You go alone. I talk you through it. That's the most help there is." He got out of the truck and went to a metal locker on the station porch, and I followed. Inside was a canvas bag, and he laid its contents on the boards under the porch light, naming each one as he set it down. A can of white blaze paint and a stiff brush, a metal scraper for the old paint, a compass, the worn topo map, the one with the pencil marks, folded to the hollow fork quadrant, a handheld radio, charged with a spare battery. He handed me a black marker and pushed up my sleeve and wrote on my forearm in block capitals, so I couldn't drop it or lose it in the dark. 5 numbers. The marker sequence, far to near, 1 through 5. "Far marker first," he said. "That's number 1. Work in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5's the last, closest to the road. You do not skip one. You do not do them out of order. Wet or dry, you remark every one." He looked up at the ridge, at the little orange point of the tower light, and then at the black eastern sky. "Sun clears that ridge in a hair under 3 hours. Light goes off when it does. You want to be done and back across the road before then." He zipped the bag and put it in my hands. It was heavier than it looked. I drove the spur road alone to the far trailhead, the one with the register box, and parked with the nose of the truck pointed back out toward the road, the way you park when part of you wants to leave fast. I clipped the handheld to my chest, put the headlamp on, shouldered the bag, and stepped off the gravel onto the trail. Dell's voice came through the radio right away, low and steady. "You're at the trailhead. First marker's about a half-mile in, where the maintained trail meets the old one. You'll know it. Go." So I went, into the dark, under the trees, my headlamp a narrow cone of white on wet tread and black trunks. The far marker was where he said, a tree at the junction with an old blaze on it, a white rectangle gone gray and flaking. I set down the bag, took out the scraper, and worked the old paint off the way he'd told me, down to clean bark. Then I opened the can, loaded the brush, and laid a fresh white rectangle, the exact size marked on the map, edges square. "Done," I said into the radio. "First one's done." "Good," Dell said. "Cap the paint. Move to 2. My hands had been steady the whole time, steadier than I'd expected, the work giving me somewhere to put myself. I capped the can, tightened it, packed the brush. And behind me, back the way I'd come, out in the black, past the edge of my light, the woods made a sound. Not the wind, not rain, the specific, weighted sound of a foot coming down on wet ground, of something stepping onto the trail behind me. "Don't turn around," Dell said, before I could, like he'd heard it through the radio, or knew it would come. "Whatever's behind you, it's behind you. Keep your light forward. Move to 2. I kept my light forward. I made my feet go, one and then the other, deeper in. And I didn't look back, though the back of my neck had gone cold, and every animal part of me was screaming to turn. Marker 2 came, and I remarked it, hands not so steady now, and pushed on toward 3. That was when I saw the light off to the side of the trail, warm and yellow, where no light should be. A campsite. A lantern hung from a branch, throwing a soft circle, a fire ring of stones, and sitting beside the cold ring, small and hunched, a figure. It turned its head toward me as my beam swept near it, and it said my name, my full name, first and last, the way it would appear in a register, in a voice I half recognized from somewhere, a young man's voice, tired and pleading. Cole Bergen. It said it was cold. It said it had been out here so long, and could I just come sit a minute, just help it back to the road? I thought of the binder. Voice only. Not recovered. Rule 4 came up in my throat, and I said it under my breath. Keep your light down and keep walking. Rangers on this shift don't give their names. And I dropped my beam to the tread, and I did not put my light on it, and I did not stop. It called again, closer now, off to my right and slightly ahead, pacing me through the trees. Cole, you know me. But I didn't say a name back. I didn't give it mine. I walked, eyes down, reciting the rule, and I passed the warm circle of light and left it behind me in the dark. Marker 3 was on a tree just past the campsite, and I reached it out of breath and shaking, and I stopped cold. The blaze was already there, fresh. A clean white rectangle, exactly the right size, exactly the right place, and when my light hit it, it shone because it was wet. The paint was wet, beaded slightly, catching the beam. And it had not been there 4 days ago, and it was not my work, and there was no one out here to have done it. Every ordinary instinct I had said the marker was fine, better than fine. It was already done, freshly painted. Move on, don't waste your minutes. And then Rule 5 surfaced, word for word, the way I'd recited it 4 times in the truck. If a paint blaze is wet, you did not pass it earlier. Remark it. 3's already painted, I said into the radio, hearing how strange it sounded. It's wet. Somebody painted it. Should I? Wet means you didn't pass it, Del said, instant, hard. You didn't paint that. Remark it. Right over the wet. Same as the others. So I did. I made myself scrape it. Made myself lay my own white over the wet white that wasn't mine, my brush dragging through paint that shouldn't exist, and it felt like arguing with a thing that was trying to be helpful, like painting over a gift. But I trusted the card over my own eyes, because my own eyes had already been wrong once this week, at a pile of rocks. When I finished and looked back, the warm lantern light down the trail had gone out. Just gone. No glow. No figure. Only black. 2 markers left. I checked my forearm, checked the sky through a gap in the canopy. Gray at the very bottom edge now. Maybe 40 minutes. I moved. Marker 4 was farther than I remembered. Downhill, the tread slick, and I was half running when the radio spoke. Cole, Del's voice, Del's exact cadence, the pauses in the right places. Change of plan. Sequence is off. Skip 5. Come back now, straight back, before the light. You've done enough. I stopped. Relief flooded up so fast it made me dizzy. Done enough. Come back. And my body turned toward the road before my mind caught the wrongness. He'd said, Cole. Dell had never once said my name, not in a truck, not on a trail, not once all night. He'd called me Bergen, or nothing at all. Rangers on this shift do not give their names, the card said. And I understood in a cold rush that the rule cut both ways, that we didn't use names out here because names were the handle the thing grabbed, and the thing had just grabbed mine and handed it back to me in Dell's voice. I keyed nothing. I did not answer it. I dropped to marker 4 and scraped and painted with my hands shaking, reciting the card out loud over the radio's coaxing. Do not answer. Keep walking, if a blaze is wet. And under the fake Dell's smooth voice, a second voice broke through, faint, ragged with distance and static. The real one. Don't listen to it. Bergen, last markers the gate. The gate on 4. Go. Bergen, not Cole. Bergen. I capped the paint, grabbed the bag, and ran for the last marker, the sky going pale gray behind the ridge, and the false voice calling my name behind me, softer and softer, all the way down. The trail spilled out onto the service road, 4 right at the gate, and I came off the tread at a dead run and stopped. The 5th marker was a post beside the gate, the last blaze, easy to see, but the gate itself stopped me cold. It was standing open. The steel bar was swung wide, the road beyond it clear, and the padlock and chain hung from the post exactly where they should be, and the lock was latched shut. Closed. Fastened. A locked padlock holding a chain that was still looped through the ring, and yet the gate had swung open past all of it, the way line 5 on the card said it would. The thing that couldn't happen, happening in front of me in the gray light. Rule 3 came without my having to reach for it. Close the gate by hand. Do not touch the lock. I set down the bag. I put both hands on a cold, wet steel of the bar, and I did not touch the padlock, did not touch the chain, and I swung the gate closed by hand until it seated against the post with a heavy iron sound. Then I opened the paint, and I laid the 5th blaze on the post, white and square, my last one, as the ridgeline behind me went from black to pale. When I capped the can, the woods behind me changed. Not a sound. A pressure, one that had been leaning on the back of my neck all night, lifted all at once, like a held breath let go. I looked down the road at the junction where I'd first seen the wrong sign. The hollow fork sign was still there, but the arrow pointed nowhere now, at no trail, at nothing, just a board with a name and no direction left in it. I stood there in the graying dark, catching my breath, and I felt watched, the way I'd felt all night, but different, softer. I looked toward the tree line across the road, and there was a man standing there. He wore a ranger's uniform, but not our uniform, an older cut, the colors faded, a flat-brimmed hat of a style I'd only seen in the framed photographs on the station wall. He was too far to see his face clearly, and I didn't try to. I thought of the binder, of all those names, and I was certain, without knowing how, that he was one of them, a name with a status I hadn't read. He didn't speak. He didn't come closer. He looked at me across the road, and then he lifted his chin. Once, a small nod, the kind of nod one ranger gives another at the end of a long shift, the kind that means it's done. You can go in now." And then, up on the ridge behind me, the tower light went off. I felt more than saw it, the small change in the quality of the dark as the sun broke the ridgeline and washed everything gray-gold, and I turned to look at it. And when I turned back to the tree line, the man was gone. No movement, no sound of leaving. Just trees, wet and ordinary, and a bird starting up somewhere, one and then another, the insects finding their voices again, the woods becoming only woods. I picked up the bag. My legs didn't want to hold me. I walked back to the truck through morning light and drove to the station with the windows down, listening to the sound of a world that had gone back to being a world. Del was on the porch when I pulled in, a mug in his hands, and he didn't smile, and he didn't ask if I was all right. He looked at me for a moment, read whatever was on my face, and then he turned and went inside, and I followed him back to the cold room and the metal desk. He took the cracked binder down, opened it to the first blank line after the last entry, and clicked on the gooseneck lamp. He wrote in that same cramped shorthand I'd read hours before, and I watched him do it. He wrote the date. He wrote my name, Bergen, C. And in the status column, he wrote 2 words, boundary restored. Then, after them, a small space, and 1 word more, returned. He set the pen down. "Most of them," he said, nodding at the pages above. "All those years, all those statuses. You only ever get to write one of those. Boundary restored, and the man's gone. Or the man comes back, and the line's still open." He tapped my line, the 2 entries, the boundary and the man both accounted for. Both of those, together, on 1 line, that's rare. You should know it's rare. He didn't congratulate me. It wasn't that kind of thing. He held out the pen, and I signed my name under his entry. And my hand, which had shaken for hours, was finally steady on the paper. Then Del closed the binder, slid it back into its exact gap on the shelf, and clicked off the lamp. "Go sleep," he said. "You're back on tonight." 4 days later, a new one showed up, a seasonal named Marcus Vane, 20 maybe, all shoulders and grin, hired to cover the nights I couldn't. Del told me to ride with him the first shift, to show him the loop, the way I'd been shown. So at 9 o'clock, I sat in the passenger seat of the same truck, and when Marcus had logged his fuel and clicked his flashlight and settled in, I reached up to the visor and took down the card. It was a little more worn than it had been. I held it a second, the way Del had held it, and then I set it in the kid's hand. "Read the card?" I said. He read it. I watched his face. He got to line 3, the trail sign, and he snorted. A laugh with real relief in it. The laugh of a guy realizing the scary new job comes with a joke instead of a hazing. "Is this a thing?" he said, grinning at me, waving the card. "You guys do this to everybody? The dead radio channel? The gate that opens with the lock shut? Come on." He laughed again, waiting for me to laugh with him, to let him off the hook, to say, "Yeah, we mess with the new guys." I didn't laugh. I looked at him until the grin started to go, and then I told him the only thing worth telling him. "The rules aren't up for questioning," I said. "They're up for following." I slid the card back up behind the elastic, into the worn spot that fit it exactly. "Start the loop," I said. And he did.